The Discovery, the exploration vessel, Zenith's Pride, drifted through the darkness of the Kardov Nebula, its sensors sweeping the void for anything of interest. Commander Korthax stood at the helm, his 6 arms folded behind his crystalline body as he watched the endless streams of data flow across the displays. The Zalathi Empire had been the dominant force in this sector for 3 millennia, and they prided themselves on understanding every piece of technology that crossed their borders. When the sensor officer's tentacles suddenly stiffened, Korthax knew they had found something significant. The young Zalathi's voice carried an unusual tremor as she reported her findings. A vessel of unknown configuration had been detected, drifting powerless near the nebula's edge. The ship's design matched nothing in their extensive database, but energy readings suggested it had been abandoned for at least several cycles. Korthax moved closer to the display. His interest piqued. The vessel was massive, easily 3 times the size of their exploration ship, with a hull design that seemed almost primitive in its brutalist approach. Where Zalathi ships were works of art with flowing curves and energy-efficient designs, this vessel looked like someone had welded armor plates onto more armor plates, then decided that wasn't enough and added even more. The science officer, an elderly Zalathi named Vexron, ran additional scans. The results made his optical clusters flicker with confusion. The ship's hull was composed of materials they had never encountered before, alloys that seemed to defy conventional metallurgy. Even more puzzling was the sheer redundancy of its systems. The vessel had 12 separate power cores when even their largest battleships only required 3. As they approached, more details became clear. The ship bore markings in an alien script that their translation matrices struggled to decode. After several attempts, the computer finally produced a result that sent a ripple of excitement through the bridge crew. The markings identified it as the UES Persistence, a heavy combat vessel belonging to a species called humans. Humans were a recent addition to the galactic community. Having made first contact only 40 standard cycles ago, they occupied a small cluster of systems on the galaxy's rim, keeping largely to themselves. The Zalathi had observed them from afar, noting their unusual tendency to over-engineer everything, and their strange insistence on maintaining a large military despite facing no immediate threats. Korthax saw an opportunity. Here was a chance to study human technology up close, to understand what made these newcomers tick. The intelligence value alone would be immeasurable. He ordered his crew to attempt communication with the vessel, but received only silence in response. Thermal scans showed no heat signatures and life support systems appeared to be offline. The communications officer suddenly straightened, her voice urgent. A message was coming through on a little-used diplomatic frequency. The holographic projector activated, displaying a human in a dark uniform. The creature stood on only 2 legs, had just 2 arms, and possessed a disturbingly mobile face that kept changing expressions. The human identified herself as Admiral Chen of the United Earth Navy. Her tone was polite but firm as she addressed Korthax directly. She explained that they had detected the Zenith's Pride approaching the Persistence and strongly advised them to maintain their distance. The ship had been damaged in a pirate engagement and abandoned by its crew, but it was scheduled for recovery by human forces. Korthax considered this information carefully. The humans were still technically within Zalathi space, and under interstellar salvage law, any abandoned vessel in their territory was subject to their jurisdiction. He politely informed Admiral Chen of this fact, adding that they would be happy to return the vessel once their scientific examination was complete. The human's expression changed to something Korthax couldn't quite interpret. Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a different quality. She explained that human vessels operated under different protocols than most species were familiar with. The Persistence might appear dead, but it was far from defenseless. She urged them once more to wait for human recovery teams. The transmission ended with Admiral Chen saying something that the translator struggled with, something about sleeping dogs and the wisdom of letting them lie. Korthax dismissed it as one of the many confusing human metaphors their species seemed fond of using. Vexron expressed concern about the Admiral's warnings, but Korthax overruled him. The Zalathi had been exploring space for 3,000 years. They had encountered every type of automated defense system, every variety of booby trap, every kind of hostile technology the galaxy had to offer. Whatever primitive countermeasures the humans had installed, would be child's play for their sophisticated scanning equipment and expertise. The boarding shuttle launched 30 minutes later, carrying a team of 12 specialists. The shuttle pilot, a young officer named Thymos, guided them carefully toward the human vessel's docking port. As they drew closer, the true scale of the persistence became apparent. The ship's hull was scarred with weapon impacts, some still glowing faintly with residual energy. The docking port accepted their universal adapter without issue, and the airlock cycled normally. The boarding team, led by Security Chief Kelnar, entered the ship with confidence. The corridors were dark, lit only by dim emergency lighting that cast long shadows. The walls were covered with pipes, cables, and access panels, a utilitarian design that wasted no space on aesthetics. What struck them most was the smell. The air recyclers were offline, but the atmosphere still carried a distinct scent, something metallic mixed with an organic component they couldn't identify. Writing covered many surfaces, not just identification markers, but what appeared to be informal messages. Their translators worked overtime, revealing phrases like Johnson Station, no sleep till Earth, and mysteriously, knock 3 times. They moved deeper into the ship, documenting everything. The humans seemed to build with the assumption that catastrophic failure was not just possible, but inevitable. Every system had backups, every backup had redundancies, and every redundancy had manual overrides. It was engineering paranoia taken to an almost absurd extreme. Kelnar's team reached what appeared to be a command center. Unlike Zalathi bridges, which were open and spacious, this room was cramped and fortified. The walls were lined with actual physical armor plating, and each station was enclosed in what looked like a protective cage. The main display showed a logo of Earth with text beneath it that translated as, "We stand guard." The science team began connecting their equipment to the human computers, bypassing the security with techniques they had perfected over centuries. Data flowed into their storage devices, technical specifications, operational procedures, and tactical doctrines. It was a treasure trove of information about these mysterious humans. Then something changed. It started as a subtle vibration through the deck plating, so faint that they almost missed it. Emergency lights throughout the ship shifted from dim white to amber. Screens that had been dark suddenly displayed a single message in multiple languages, including freshly translated Zalathi. Intrusion detected. Initiating Defense Protocol 7. This is your only warning. Kelnar ordered an immediate evacuation, but the airlock they had entered through sealed with a definitive clang. Secondary barriers slammed down throughout the ship, dividing it into isolated sections. Some of the boarding team found themselves separated from the others, trapped in different parts of the vessel. The vibration grew stronger, and they realized with growing alarm that it was the sound of fusion reactors coming online. Not 1 or 2, but all 12 of the ship's power cores were warming up simultaneously. The humans hadn't just abandoned their ship. They had left it in some kind of dormant state, waiting. Vexron's voice crackled over the communicator from the Zenith's Pride. His words were rushed, panicked. The Persistence was powering weapon systems. Shields were forming around its hull, and most terrifyingly, it was beginning to move. The dead ship was very much alive, and it had noticed the intruders in its halls. As klaxons began to wail and automated voices started counting down in that strange human language, Korthax finally understood Admiral Chen's warning. They had not found an abandoned vessel. They had walked into a trap that the humans had left for anyone foolish enough to ignore their warnings. The sleeping dog had awakened, and it was very, very angry. The reckoning. The first indication that they had severely underestimated human engineering came when the internal defense systems activated. Instead of the energy weapons or gas attacks the boarding team had prepared for, the Persistence employed something far more primitive and terrifying. Panels in the walls slid open, revealing projectile weapons that fired solid metal slugs at hypersonic speeds. Security Chief Kelnar barely managed to activate his personal shield before the corridor erupted in violence. The kinetic rounds smashed into the energy barrier with enough force to send him stumbling backward. His shield held, but the power drain was enormous. These weren't elegant weapons. They were brutal, efficient, and designed to overwhelm through sheer destructive force. Through the ship's communication system, a voice began to speak. It wasn't the harsh automated warnings anymore, but something that sounded almost conversational. The translator identified it as English, delivering what seemed to be a pre-recorded message from the ship's captain. This is Captain Sarah Martinez of the UES Persistence. If you're hearing this message, you've made a serious error in judgment. This vessel operates under Standing Order 17. No ship falls into enemy hands intact. You were warned to stay away. You chose not to listen. The consequences of that choice are now yours to bear. Korthax, watching the chaos unfold from his bridge, ordered his weapons officer to target the Persistence's reactor sections. If they could disable the power cores, they might be able to shut down the defense systems. The Zenith's Pride's main cannon charged, and a brilliant beam of coherent energy lanced out toward the human vessel. What happened next defied everything the Zalathi knew about shield technology. Instead of a single barrier, the Persistence generated overlapping fields, each one calibrated to a different frequency. The beam that should have punched through to the reactor compartment dispersed harmlessly across multiple shield layers. Even more impossibly, the ship's armor itself seemed to be reactive, reshaping at the molecular level to better absorb the energy. Inside the Persistence, Kelnar's team was fighting for survival. The ship had become a labyrinth of dangers. Gravity fluctuated wildly in different sections, going from 0 to 3 times standard without warning. The atmosphere changed composition in isolated pockets, forcing them to rely on their suit supplies. Even the temperature varied, with some corridors flash freezing while others heated to near plasma levels. The science officer, Thymos, had managed to reach one of the computer terminals that was still active. What he discovered there made his transparent blood run cold. The ship wasn't just defending itself. It was learning. Every tactic they tried, every countermeasure they deployed, was being analyzed and adapted to in real time. The Persistence's AI wasn't just a defense system. It was a tactical intelligence that had been designed for one purpose: to ensure that anyone who tried to take a human ship would regret it. The terminal displayed files that Thymos managed to partially decode. They revealed something about human psychology that the Zalathi had never considered. Humans didn't just prepare for defeat. They embraced it as a possibility and planned accordingly. Every one of their ships was designed to be a weapon even in death. They called it the Pyrrhic Protocol. If we lose, you lose too. Meanwhile, 3 of the boarding team members had been corralled into what appeared to be a medical bay. The doors sealed behind them, and for a moment they thought they might have found a safe zone. Then the medical equipment activated. Scanners bathed them in various forms of radiation, not harmful but incredibly thorough. Every aspect of their biology was being cataloged, analyzed, and transmitted. The human voice returned, this time speaking directly to them. Biological analysis complete. Species Zalathi. Weaknesses identified. Countermeasures prepared. This information will be distributed to all human vessels. Thank you for your involuntary contribution to our tactical database. The implications hit them like a physical blow. The ship wasn't just defending itself. It was gathering intelligence. Every moment they remained on board, the humans were learning more about them, their technology, their vulnerabilities. It was a honey trap of the most sophisticated kind. Back on the Zenith's Pride, more alerts were flooding in. The Persistence had activated its own weapons, but instead of energy beams or plasma bolts, it was launching what appeared to be small metallic cylinders. Point defense systems easily destroyed most of them, but a few got through, attaching to the hull like parasites. Within seconds, they began to burn through the armor using some kind of molecular acid. Emergency teams rushed to contain the breaches, but more cylinders kept coming. It was another example of human philosophy: overwhelming force through simple, replicable weapons. Korthax finally admitted defeat and opened a channel to Admiral Chen. The human appeared on the screen immediately, as if she had been waiting. Her expression was unreadable as Korthax requested assistance in recovering his boarding team. Admiral Chen's response was measured. She explained that the Persistence would release the boarding team once it completed its analysis. No permanent harm would come to them, but they would be thoroughly scanned, cataloged, and recorded. She called it a defensive measure, a way to ensure that humanity could defend itself against future threats. The conversation that followed revealed much about human nature. They were not the aggressive conquerors that some species were, nor were they naive pacifists. They were survivors who had learned through bitter experience that the galaxy could be a dangerous place. Every ship they built, every system they designed, was created with the assumption that someday, somewhere, someone would try to take it from them. 2 hours later, the Persistence finally released the boarding team. They stumbled back onto the Zenith's Pride, physically unharmed but psychologically shattered. The ship had shown them visions of human history, wars that had decimated their planet, conflicts that had driven them to the brink of extinction. It was a species that had looked into the abyss and decided to become something the abyss would fear. As the Zalathi ship limped away, the Persistence powered down its weapons but remained vigilant. Within hours, a human recovery vessel arrived, and the great warship was taken under tow. But the damage to Zalathi Pride, and their intelligence assumptions, was complete. The incident report that Korthax filed would become required reading at every military academy in Zalathi space. It detailed not just the technical capabilities of human vessels, but the psychology behind them. Humans built their ships like they expected to lose them, and paradoxically, that made them almost impossible to truly defeat. In the weeks that followed, the galactic community's perception of humanity shifted dramatically. They were no longer seen as newcomers to be studied or potential subjects for expansion. They were recognized as something far more dangerous, a species that had weaponized paranoia and turned defensive warfare into an art form. Admiral Chen would later meet with Korthax at a neutral station. Over drinks that neither species could actually share with the other, she explained something that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The Persistence had been operating at less than 10% of its defensive capability. If it had recognized them as a genuine threat rather than merely curious explorers, none of them would have survived. When Korthax asked why the humans felt the need for such extreme measures, Chen's answer was simple. Humanity had learned through bitter experience that in space no one could hear you scream, but everyone would try to take what was yours if they thought they could. So humans had decided to make sure that anyone who tried would live to regret it, and more importantly, live to warn others. The Persistence was eventually repaired and returned to service, but its greatest victory had already been achieved. Word spread throughout the galaxy about what happened to those who ignored human warnings. The message was clear. Human ships were not prizes to be claimed or technology to be stolen. They were sleeping dragons, best left undisturbed. In the end, the Zalathi Empire gained valuable intelligence from their encounter, just not the kind they had expected. They learned that humans were not to be underestimated, that their seemingly primitive redundancies and paranoid engineering were actually sophisticated defense strategies, and most importantly, that when humans said to leave something alone, it was wise to listen. The galaxy had discovered that humans had a simple philosophy when it came to their technology. We'll share it with friends, trade it with allies, but if you try to take it, you'll find that our ships bite back, and once they bite, they never let go.